Hello, this is Hyperborean Radio coming at you straight out of the Wasteland. I'm Celtic God, and with me today is the Lore Keeper. How you doing today?
I am doing well, and today we're going to talk about something that I've actually been finding is a bit of an interesting concept, which is there seems to be this obsession that people have with the idea of my god can beat up your god. You know, it's a little like a celestial version of my dad can beat up your dad, but with even less substantial proof of who can beat up who. And I think this is something that we should talk about. What do you think?
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, like there's a video that's on YouTube, for instance. Yeah, it's really good. I don't remember the title of it. It's the one where Yahweh is a dragon or something like that. Give me a minute and I'll look it up. But the guy actually states something in there that's just absolutely brilliant. The only thing, like if you focus on the stories, the only thing that makes Yahweh all powerful, the creator of the universe, omniscient, all this other good stuff, is just simply because they said so. There is nothing in the stories to substantiate it. So yeah, and the thing is people in our groups have a tendency actually to fall into that. They want this all-powerful singular deity, and really it's kind of nonsensical in my opinion.
Well, and it's very telling because this started with some Abrahamic faiths and the Dharmic faiths to an extent as well, if you get into the right sects. But when you come to European paganism, I think it's very telling that of the ones we have a roughly intact set of stories, even if they're mined from the folklore, the Greco-Roman, which did have the occasional philosopher throwing out monotheism. I think Platonism is one of them. I might be mixing that up with something. But the Roman Empire kind of fused with that offshoot of Judaism with Jesus and became the monotheistic religion of Catholicism, Christianity. And it's not really present in either the Greco-Roman, outside of a few philosophers, and then it's not really present in the Celtic, though people will apply it to the Dagda or Lug because they've got a lot of positives. And the reason for that seems to be more along the lines of Celtic Christianity. So instead of trying to place artificially one of the deities from the pantheon in a Yahweh-esque monotheistic position, they kind of just made the gods, like there's actual stories from what you could call Celtic mythology, but was more likely Celtic Christianity, where the gods straight up become saints. Like, convert to Christianity. It's a whole weird thing they have in that section. But then you get to Slavic and Baltic and Scandinavian and even Finnish. There is this sort of one god that is placed at a way higher stratum, even if the lore doesn't support that, whether that's Odin, Dievas, Rod, or I think Ukko. And it's even been acknowledged by some that, like, in the Finnish mythology, Ukko was probably not nearly as Yahweh-esque or like Sky Papa-esque as he is now, and that most likely there's been some shuffling there.
Right, and again, the point of this is not to say, oh yeah, Yahweh's the most powerful, blah blah, and absolutely not. Actually, to the contrary. But it's to point out that there is a tendency for people to play, well, my dad can beat up your dad, except for with the gods. Even though why does it even matter to a polytheist? Why does that even matter? If my dad can beat up your dad, Garsh, it's silly, it's nonsensical, and it's left over actually from a poisonous religion. And by the way, the name of the video that I was referencing, and I'll put a link to it in the description, is Evidence That Yahweh Was a Dragon. So I'll put a link in there. It's, if nothing else, it'll be worth a chuckle, I think, because he makes some very good points.
Well, and the main thing here is that it's not to beat up on Christianity, which, if I really wanted to, I could. But it's too easy. It's like hitting a kitten. Except the kitten's really, really ugly and has committed genocide several times. But the point I'm getting at is, and this is actually something that occurs. It's like the whole meme: your your God was nailed to a cross. My God has a hammer. Any other questions? Or that image that goes around. It's a cool image. It's like Odin has just beat the living frick out of Jesus, who is depicted, I think, even as like a zombie or really bloodied up in that image. I'm sure almost everybody's seen it. It's this idea that one God is stronger than the other, and I've seen this thrown around by Christians as well, where they'll say, well, our God's stronger because you people converted, therefore the Christians won, glossing over, the fact that most of the time it was a superficial conversion of the leadership. Or, this is my personal favorite of examples, kidnap the women and children or even kill them. So either hostages or straight up demoralization. And in many cases, they would hire the pagan men, the warriors, to actually go fight for them and then slip in and kill or kidnap the women and children. It's the weirdest thing. And you find this a lot, actually, and it's their go-to tactic, is the underhandedness. So if you want to try and use that, then I guess the definition of strength is very different from what I think our people typically appreciate. But the reason I think this is such an unhealthy obsession is, what is the difference between making, I don't know, for a lesser-known deity, Priapus, or Burstuk, if you want to go for the Slavic pantheon. Or maybe we could go with Sjöfn, a relatively unknown Norse goddess. The difference between them considered the most powerful is effectively what was written down. This is by and large what defines things. And it's actually kind of ridiculous when you consider the fact that some of the most powerful deities we have almost nothing on. Cernunnos was important enough that Major League, very well-known, very popular Roman deities were depicted as subservient to him in some of the carvings. Or Janus, a relatively unknown, by most people at least, Roman deity. He predates most of the Greco-Roman sort of synchronized pantheon, and you had to go through him to get to any of the others. He was really not a minor deity, but because there's so few stories of him, at least especially in the popular consciousness, and because he didn't have a Greek equivalent, he's been downgraded, but he really doesn't deserve it.
Well, and just to further this idea, you have to bear in mind who wrote the stories. Who wrote down the stories that we have access to today. I'm pretty sure that they want their deity sitting up at the top, and in many cases the people that wrote down the stories weren't necessarily trying to preserve the stories. They was trying to preserve a way of poetry, a way of storytelling. They was trying to preserve some of the culture, but none of the religion. So there's actually a lot to this. So, of course. And then in some cases, they're trying to make direct comparisons. So they're trying to make a Celtic Christianity. I think it's is it Celtic Christianity or Celtic Catholicism? Okay, so Christian or Celtic Christianity. Or there's the priests that messed around with the Eddas. Whether that's Snorri himself or the priest that found them later, who knows? But like, for instance, in the Eddas, which is one of the things that when these stories was read to me, was that made me laugh, was so and so, the wisest of the gods. So and so, the wisest of the gods. So and so, the wisest of the gods. They're all the wisest. I bet you they is all the strongest too. Which is fair enough when you're taking the stories one at a time and in this village or this village or this village. Of course. But then I'm not even 100% sure where I'm going with this, other than people take it to ridiculous levels. Absolutely ridiculous levels.
Well, I guess one thing, and the main reason for this is what people end up arguing about really doesn't matter, because the idea that, I don't know, Odin is stronger than Yahweh, or Yahweh is stronger than Odin, or whatever people are trying to argue, it's an irrelevant question because their strength is determined on what is written about them and what people consider it to be. And simply put, the only reason that this game even exists is if people are deciding to use the stories as the basis for everything. If we decide to take every story that's written down as literal and exclusionary, then therefore the Bible is the truth. And Yahweh is not only the most powerful, he is the only God.
And why is that? Because the Bible says so.
Precisely.
That's the only reason, is because the Bible says so. Personally, I say, okay, Yahweh might exist, but he's a liar. He's just a liar.
Well, and I think this is another thing, is people will try... And this got a really bad rap as a result of the Wiccans. But on average, the thing is, whether or not a deity is yours, that doesn't make it a real or a fake deity. For example, I do believe Amaterasu and Coyote are about as real as our deities. I have no interest in trying to venerate them or connect with them or anything on that level because they're not mine. And there's actually, we've covered this before, there's an offshoot trying to make Amaterasu and Shinto its own sort of universalist religion. It's really weird, actually.
Right. Well, and I'd say more important, and this is what I'm pretty sure that you meant, but you said, because they're not mine. They're not ours. They're not Hyperborean deities, so it doesn't matter. And of course, everybody's going to say that their dad is the biggest and the bestest one. But I think this is part of what leads people to jamming the various deities together. Because why is Cernunnos not enough? Why does he have to be more than just Cernunnos? Why does Thor have to be more than just Thor? Why does Rod have to be more than just Rod? Why do we have to keep jamming? It's like Pokemon power-ups. We'll take this one and combine it with this one here, and there's some game thing like that where you blend these things and make a bigger, better thing. Why is this even a concern for us? It's a reflection of who we are as a people. So, is that what we want to be, where we just aren't enough? I don't think so. I really don't think so. We are amazing. So why are we trying to do this? And when you start jamming stuff together, then you end up with a thing that's not a thing. If you don't believe me, just look out in the world right now. Why? You can see it with the beige movement. Because being Hyperborean isn't enough. You need to be Hyperborean plus this other thing over here and be beige. Being Chinese isn't enough. You have to be Chinese plus something else so that you can power level up. What the? This is not good or healthy for anybody, and we're seeing it done with all of our deities, regardless of what ethnic group you're part of.
Well, and it's fairly telling because one of the things I think a lot of people forget is when Christianity would initially move into an area, while it's presented, if you look at their mythology, like the saints and stuff like that, as saint moves in, converts all of the, stinking, crap-eating, tree-worshipping heathens to, Big Papa Yahweh, and all is well. it never worked out like that. There's numerous examples of the old gods, our gods, being worshipped next to Yahweh or Jesus or whoever they're trying to push in the area. And the reason for this is fairly obvious. It's because it would come in as just another cult of a deity, which I know cult has a lot of negative connotations nowadays, but it just meant a group of people that venerated a deity, and there were specific traditions associated with it, and probably a holiday and various things. And this was just a thing. It's like why are Frigg and Freya so common? Most people will go the route of combining them to get Super Frigg Freya. Go Dragon Ball Z with it. And they'll try to point to, well, they fulfill similar roles and look at their names. Except, there's actually a more plausible explanation that some people have noticed. They were goddesses that did similar roles, but were from separate areas. And just as more and more groups sort of got jammed into Scandinavia, or more and more cults got pushed to the edge where they were interacting with these groups, they became more and more conjoined. And you ended up with two deities that had similar roles and whose names are derived from a similar concept, placed in one what people would refer to as a pantheon. And just for an example, there are 3 gods in the Norse pantheon alone whose names can be translated to Lord. There is Freyr, there is Balder, and there is Bragi. There's other things they can be translated to, but those are the 3 examples. Now there's 3 deities in the Norse pantheon that can be translated to beloved: Freyr, Freya, and Frigg. And yes, you heard Freyr in both categories. It's because these are really old words that people do not 100% know what they mean. So Freyr means Lord, Freyr means beloved. It's Freya means beloved, Freya means lady. It's a whole thing, and it's one of the reasons going off of etymology so strictly can become an issue, because there are many words derived from one word. And there's also words that are less in common. Like one thing that some people, for some reason, have obsessed over is, why does the word man not have a prefix? Because women have wa-men. It's because it used to be were-man. That's where werewolf comes from. It meant male. It basically meant man, so male, human, wolf. It's a whole thing. And it's how language works, is it always has this weird way of doing things. But I've noticed that people have this desire to have a super deity. That's why they end up combining deities, like the Morrigan. Very popular, very powerful, well-known deity. I have seen at least 5 different goddesses be called the Morrigan, even if they have really nothing to do with her story-wise. I've seen people try to jam goddesses together just because they're both associated with birds. And that can mean very, very different things. Like Athena, associated with the owl. The Morrigan, associated with the raven and the crow. Or Regana, who's also associated with owls. All of a sudden, every deity that's associated with something that flies is one super goddess, which is actually another thing that is fairly common, is this constructed cult of the great goddess, which I've also noticed. This super powerful feminine deity. And the reason that I think it's so important to point this out and understand this whole my God can beat up your God mentality is not a thing. It's not truly something that always mattered. And yes, I know there's examples of this, the Christians coming in and saying, my God's stronger than your God. Let's test it out. Yeah, you could do that, but it didn't necessarily mean that it was stronger than every deity. And the Christians usually cheated too. They would, wasn't one of them walk over a fire or something, and he basically bent the rules?
Yeah, I think it was in Iceland, the last berserker. And a priest goes there and my God is stronger than your God. Let's test this out. Your people like fire, so you will spend 3 days building a fire, and you can cross through yours first, but if you can't cross through mine, then that proves my deity is stronger than yours. And of course, the berserker, the last berserker, supposedly, I'm sure that's probably a couple different versions of it, he easily walks through the heathen fire, but could not even enter the Christian fire. Now, I'm suspecting that that's pretty much the end of the description there. I'm suspecting what they did was probably build a suspended fire. So he literally couldn't enter the fire because it's up too high. And yes, it's easy enough to build a suspended fire in that way. That's low and dirty, but our people, we have a tendency, one, we do like to gamble, and two, we have a tendency to at least try and keep our word.
Well, and this is one thing that I think is important to bring up is a lot of the sources we do have of European traditions, they do come from the church, and you have to know how to pull off the veneer that they put on stuff. Because they might be 100% honest, but they're going to spin it. You know, it's like the whole shuddering masses at the border to breathe free versus hordes of thousands of people crossing every day, many of whom are, I don't know, some gang or whatever. But it's all in how they spin the language. You know, it's like a sacred grove. You're not going there to venerate a tree. Donner's oak was not Donner. You know? Irminsul was not Ermin. These were not identical to the deity. But the church will say, we worship trees, we worship rivers. Whereas there's deities left and right that are associated either with trees or rivers or mountains. It's not that they're literally the mountain or the river or the tree. And this is kind of them scoffing, we have the one true deity. And the reason I think that this whole, the one true faith, the one true deity, my God can beat up your God, is so malicious as a thought process, if you think about it, is the Christians have convinced generations of us that there is a natural progression of society where eventually you end up at monotheism. And then they present their deity as proof of that. You know, ignoring that they're actually a dualist, if not trialist, if they don't have a whole pantheon, if you throw in the saints and the angels and all that. But this idea of my God can beat up your God, it's falling into that trap. It's people are trying to almost fish for the strongest god or goddess and then just make that the one deity they go to. And it's something I've noticed because people who have nothing to do with the deity, like the deity could be of, I don't know, let's go with poetry. But I don't know, just like a fictional example, a super god of poetry. He sang the poem that brought the world into being or whatever, you know. And then they will run off with it because they're trying to have the strongest one because they're still stuck in this mentality that they need one. And they themselves might be a butcher who's tone deaf and really likes rugby. There's plenty of deities associated with those things, but the poet god made everything, you know, so.
Yeah, and that's basically, that'd be like me walking out into the audience and saying, Bob, you're not enough. We are going to have to combine you with Frank over here and Gerald. And then you might be enough, but, you know, you're not quite soft enough. So, Francine, come over here. We're just going to jam you all together into one. Why are you not enough? And then apply this to our deities. We have many of them. Why are they not enough on their own? I just don't get it. I don't believe in this one super duper being. That's the river of life. All of creation. You want a creation story? The river of life. all of creation stems from the river of life. That is the energy that makes up all of creation. And how did it happen? Because it could happen. It's the rules of infinity, entanglement. There's scientific explanation for how this could happen with no singular creator deity required at all. I mean, really, there is.
Well, and like you brought up, you actually brought up two names that are related. Frank, which is usually short for Francis, and then you had Francine. As far as I know, these names are actually derived from the same root name. And again, people will combine those because their names are similar. And this is the weirdest thing, is like people will take Freya and Freyr and try to combine them. Even though people will admit that Freya and Freyr probably are relatively new names attributed to them, and more than likely it was a different name. Like, I don't know if it was Mardol or whatever, or Ingvi or whatever. But there's various names, and they can change over time. I've never doubted that a god's name can change over time. It's just if you're going to jam one and another from two different geographical zones, you got to have more than their names sound similar. A big example of this would be... I'm trying to think of one. The Romans did it sometimes, because not all of the one-for-one transfers was a pre-existing deity. Like, Venus was a goddess of vegetables, basically. And then she got fused with Aphrodite, and now you have the Venus everybody knows. Not every deity was like that. Some of them were straight-up new names. And though usually that wasn't the case, like Apollo didn't have an equated deity, so eventually they just started calling him Phoebus. But that wasn't a deity beforehand, as far as people know, because they kept calling him Apollo for a long time before he got that epithet. But it is something important, because, like, for instance, there's a story of the Lombards. It's how they got their long beard, which, by the way, if you by chance have Lombard genetics and you want an excuse to have a beard as a heathen, look the story up of how the Lombards got their name, and I think you'll have one. Because there's actually a written story involving that. But the Lombards, they had a whole thing where they had the deities Freya and Godin, and most people will, well, it's pronounced Freya or Frey, it's hard to tell, but basically it was God and the lady. That's effectively what it translated. It's from a Christian text. That's effectively a Christian Lombard kind of laughing at his own ancestors. People have pointed this out. If the word Freya just means lady and Godin just means God, you could just as easily treat this as like a dualistic concept of God and his wife, which it was not unheard of for people to throw family members onto deities. I think there's even some folklore where God has a wife. I don't even know if that's Mary or something else, or the devil's grandmother. The devil didn't have a grandmother, or something like that. And it's a whole thing. And I'm not saying you can't really, really like a deity. I am arguing, again, don't have to agree with me. Going off of power is a relatively ridiculous idea, and it's for one reason only. The difference between Odin and, I don't know, what's a relatively unknown male deity in there? Anthrimnir, the chef of the Norse gods. The only difference between Anthrimnir being the most popular is if we had discovered a bunch of stories where Anthrimnir is ludicrously powerful. And I could even potentially spin his story that way if I really wanted to.
Well, I was just going to ask a question is, what does powerful even mean? Really? Has anybody ever thought about this? What does powerful mean to you? Does it mean that it can't be beaten in a fight? Or does it mean that they're the most creative? Maybe it could be they make the best pork and beans. I mean, really, what does powerful even mean when we're talking about the power of the gods? And which one is more powerful than the other one? Doesn't it kind of come down to what it is that you're trying to do or what you're equating it to? Because I would say a mountain god is not very powerful when you drop them in the middle of a sea. At that point, I would have to say probably the ocean god is more powerful at that moment. In a poetry competition, the god might be the strongest. He can lift up the world and tear it in half. However, when it comes to poetry, he kind of sucks. So then the poet god is the most powerful.
Well, and I think one thing that if you try to combo gods, you get both the good and the bad, and you make them less and less relevant. It's like how God can be anything to a Christian. There's actual Christians that will say that. That even though there's a clearly defined figure in the Bible, what they effectively are is they're Christians, but they're mainly just theists that are kind of backing the winning team. But let's take Woad, for example, who is a corn spirit or corn deity from like England and Germany. Most people will say he's Odin. And just so you know, when you're doing that, you are fusing Odin, whatever your personal conception of him is, with a deity whose main thing seems to be the fertility of cornfields. And by corn, I mean main crop of the area, not maize. Who also is well known for having massive hissy fits when he burns his mouth from the blueberry jelly he burnt his mouth on that his wife made. That he stole. Or is just easily tricked by somebody. And you can argue, well, the church was making fun of people for daring to do something like that or this or that. Maybe. But I would argue it's more likely this is just a separate deity whose name kind of sounds similar, who had a very different function and more than likely wasn't above being the butt of the joke sometimes. And it might be because, like, for instance, a big example of this would be like Ares. People depict Ares as this bumbling meathead. If you think about it, it's because the people that wrote him down probably weren't very big on Ares. Because Ares was really, really big in the Spartans. The Spartans didn't really leave a lot of records. And it's the more things that get put into a deity, the more ambiguous they become. And I'm not against a god gaining or kind of changing attributes any more than I'm against somebody deciding that instead of being a car salesman, they want to be a competitive jigsaw puzzle player. I don't even know if that's a thing. Somewhere it's probably a thing. But it's like, for example, this happened a lot in the Roman pantheon. They would combine. It got too complicated because you have all these various people they've conquered. And they have their own animistic or deity cults. And the Greeks weren't against this either. They did that with Orpheus. They did that with a few other deities. And yes, I know Orpheus is a hero, but he was a deity before he was a hero because the Greeks have a habit of when they conquer an area, integrating the mythology and then sort of downplaying it, or at the very least, the city-states we tend to have stuff from. Same with the Minotaur. He was probably a deity as well. But in Rome, they would fuse, and they did this in late-stage Greece too, they would fuse the smaller deities into the bigger ones because it was easier to kind of understand that. And then the deities' aspects would grow and grow and grow and grow. And then you have a deity like, a Gaulish deity like Lenus being compared to Mars because they're both healing deities.
Right, and I want to bring up a point because this is a phrase that's flung around quite frequently. It just came up, is the bigger deity. What is a bigger deity? How do we determine which deity is bigger than another deity? Is it the number of stories? Maybe. Is it the number of temples to show that they was worshipped, or the amount of trinkets that's left around representing this deity? Also valid. However, I could, if all of a sudden I got Jeff Bezos money, I could make the biggest god ever in history, even bigger than Yahweh, simply by, and I don't know what to name this pretend god. Axios, I think, is an actual god. Random word. Fuzzy Pink Bunny. I'm going to make a god and I'm going to call it Fuzzy Pink Bunny, the biggest, bestest god ever. Now, how do I accomplish this if I got the Jeff Bezos money? I start building temples all over the planet to Fuzzy Pink Bunny. I don't even have to make any stories. Just literally build the temples, make them look religious, and I'll build them everywhere. And then I'm going to make a shit ton of necklaces. I'm trying not to swear on this channel. I'm going to make a whole bunch of necklaces and a whole bunch of little idols. And I'm going to scatter those all over the world. I'm even going to sprinkle them in the ocean. Now, in 1,000 years, and this is without anybody believing in Pink Fuzzy Bunny, is that what I named it? Without anybody believing in Pink Fuzzy Bunny, they think it's just an insane rich guy. But in 1,000 years, oh, we've got these temples everywhere to Pink Fuzzy Bunny. And there's gobs of necklaces. You can't go 5 feet without tripping over an old necklace or an idol to Pink Fuzzy Bunny. They must have all really believed in Pink Fuzzy Bunny.
I believe the term you were looking for there was the Energizer Bunny.
Yes.
But yeah, if you built a giant bunch of temples or stuff to the Energizer Bunny, or what's another thing here? But the movie A Christmas Story. He has the pink bunny outfit, and eventually that gets integrated as the origin of future Christmas.
Right, and actually there's 2 of them that's going to be competing in the pantheons here in 1,000 or 2 years, couple thousand years, assuming, there's people to dig them up or interested in digging them up. And they're 2 rodents, 2 of the biggest deities I can think of on the planet. One is called Pikachu, and the other one is called Mickey Mouse.
Well, you see, Mickey Mouse and Pikachu were actually the same deity. Mickey Mouse originated, but once it got to Japan, it became part of the tradition of Raijin, and eventually the cult of Mickey spread, and it gained the name of Pikachu. I kid you not, I've seen similar arguments for why Boreas is the same as Fuijin.
Right, and it sounds like we're being ridiculous, and you're correct, we are. But temples are built by rich people, by powerful people, people that's in control. It's not that, the mere peasants cannot build a temple, because they can. We've done it. We've designated holy sites and basically gathering places, and we might even decorate them. But for the temples or these big things that the archaeologists are actually looking for, yes, those are going to be pushed forward by powerful chieftains, kings, what's the word? It's not communities. I got too many words. My language is, Rolodex is too big.
Pray to Pikachu.
Yes, I'll pray to Pikachu and see if I can't think of the word. But that's where a lot of these things come from. Or it might just be something fashionable. How many people wear a cross, or used to wear crosses, or even now, I guess, that don't believe in Oily Josh? There's a lot of people that will wear crosses simply for fashion. Why? Because everybody else wears them. And I got the bestest one. I got the one made out of gold, and it's got this really fine engraving on it, and it costs $10,000. People get that ridiculous with it, even if they don't believe in it.
Well, and part of it is with that is it's just a famous symbol. Some people might actually wear it because it was a form of execution. It technically wasn't. I think crucifixion was actually usually performed with a straight up pole, but that's another topic altogether. Or they'll wear it because they're really into goth stuff. I don't know, they're really into the show Hellboy, so they've got like some crucifix. There's some actually cool stuff. There were actual people from Western Europe would go to Romania, and they'd come armed with this complex case full of vampire hunting equipment, which included stakes and crucifixes and a bottle of holy water and a freaking crossbow. I mean, I don't even know if they were going there specifically to hunt vampires. I'm half convinced if they did, they probably killed some sad old man. But they were coming prepared. I can say that much. And I think one interesting thing I there was a TV show, and it was a vampire hunter, and someone actually asked, like, what is up with the crucifix? Like, why did you have that made in India? Have the vampires there even heard of Jesus? And he's like, oh, vampires are basically super adapted, super predators. So their eyesight's crazy developed. So if you stick a giant geometric shape right in front of them, it just confuses them.
Well, and vampires are also another example of my daddy can beat up your daddy. Because you got the werewolf people and the vampire people that will argue with each other about which one is tougher, and they keep gaining more and more powers. Like the werewolf at one time didn't actually shift. He wasn't actually a shapeshifter, or shapeshifter. And then he was, except for when he wasn't. And then at one point, the shape-shifting went from man to wolf. Not this werewolf that we have in mind now, where it's that, what is it, probably 3/4 wolf, quarter man, a standing upright, deformed wolf. That's actually really new. So it goes across everywhere. And why? I don't care if my daddy can beat up your daddy. What I care is, can I hold my own when I need to? So, and that should be the freaking point. And my daddy, he should be good enough as who he is. It doesn't mean that he can't strive to be better. But yeah, I mean, it's wrong of me to expect these things of you that is not reasonable. Like, how dare you not be able to fly, Mr. Samuel? You know, what? Why is this reasonable? So why are we doing this to our deities, who are, in many ways, our ancestors? Some are born gods, and some are ascended to godhood, so they become gods. The whole gambit. It depends on how you look at it and which sections you're looking at, I guess. But this is my personal view on it. And it's substantiated, so cool down. But why is Odin not enough as Odin? Why is the Dagda not enough as Dagda? Why is Woden not cool enough just being Woden? Why do they have to be all jammed together? It's ridiculous. And we're playing somebody else's game at that point. It's like never really having played baseball and then walking onto a, is it NBL? The National Baseball League or whatever it is. NBA is basketball. I don't play sports ball. But it's like going and playing a professional team that nobody really cares about anyways. And baseball was the only thing I could think of that's pretty much dead. But why are you playing this professional baseball team that nobody gives a crap about, and they think baseball is more like football, and not the American football, but the rest of the world's football, so soccer. Why are you playing them baseball? That's foolish. We need to stop playing their games and make them play ours.
Well, it's what we started out with in this conversation is twofold. One, if you want to do my God is stronger than your God and start doing that argument, then you have to basically use the texts and argue that they are 100% factual, truthful. And then you end up in this weird game of trying to beat the Christians at their own game, as well as weirdly trying to make various ethnic faiths a universalist, the one true faith. And then the other thing is that people are approaching this idea that monotheism is this natural step that a culture will take. And this is simply not the case. It's happened before where cultures will become monotheistic, stuff starts getting worse, and all of a sudden they will go back to their pantheon. This happened in Egypt. This actually happened in India. It's happened before. And what it is basically someone gets the bright idea.
It's happening now.
Yeah. It's happening now. And the bright idea is it's easier to control people if you have one super deity with multiple aspects that you can shave off over time and just make them part of that god than it is to have many different cults and ideas. And yes, that does mean people are less connected, but if you want an example of a relatively cohesive country, and before people start arguing that, oh, America was mostly Christian, there's a lot of more pagan-minded people that fled being killed over in Europe and came over to America. But also, you've clearly not studied American history because the various sects of Christianity and the various regions of the country have gotten into little mini wars all the time. Like the Hatfield and McCoys was just two families that didn't like each other, possibly started over a pig. So this whole idea that America was ever 100% cohesive under a religion or anything, it's complete. It's nonsense. But people still were willing to go to bat for it because there was the idea that even though we're all different, we are allowed to be different. In America right now, for instance, everyone is basically being put under this, the overall cult of, I don't know, social justice. I think that's one. The cult of woke. And it's demanding everybody basically submit. And it's this idea that everyone has to be the same culture and therefore we're more cohesive. What you're actually doing is you're demoralizing people. Like if the British took over France and Spain and Portugal and Ireland again and Italy and Germany and then just got...
They bought it. They didn't take it over.
Okay, I understood. That's one part of the area that I'm not too well versed on. But basically took over all of Western and parts of Central and Southern Europe, and then destroyed everything they could get their hands on over the course of a couple generations and made everyone behave just like the English. People would know something's wrong, but they wouldn't know how to fix it. And that's kind of the weird thing we have in America, where we used to have all these regional cultures, all these sort of localized version of European cultures, and now they're being destroyed, and it's actually demoralizing people because people feel less connected, less in tune.
Right, and this is there's examples of this. Let's just go with an easy two. Paul Bunyan, Johnny Appleseed. Many stories, many of them even conflicting, across America. And everybody was good with it. Why? Because that's just how Minnesota tells the story. He's not really from Minnesota. He's actually from Pennsylvania. Oh, of course they think he's from Pennsylvania. He's not really from Pennsylvania. He's from Oregon. And they was okay with it. And they would tell the stories back and forth. And there was still a cohesive culture. Go figure.
Well, one of the hilarious things about Paul Bunyan is everybody thinks they have it right. And then, this is the best part, is even people that think they don't care about Paul Bunyan, the moment, like, I knew someone who I told, oh yeah, people will associate Paul Bunyan as starting in Minnesota, or starting in Michigan, or starting in Wisconsin, or something like that. And he apparently went and told one of his friends up in New England somewhere that, yeah, some people think Paul Bunyan didn't originate in New England. The friend was not happy to hear that. I'm sure, like, the rest of the day, that friend had not cared or even thought about Paul Bunyan. And then all of a sudden it's like, no, he's from Maine, and I will argue with anyone whether or not he's from Maine.
Right, and sometimes the arguing is the fun part. And I've actually seen people come to blows about it, about similar things. But in the end, they just ended up laughing and having a drink and then trying to outdo each other with stories. So you can still have a cohesive culture without a cohesive story. We don't need a singular story. It's actually binding our people. It's you can see it. The more that things start to singularize, the harder our people are bound. We're bound by these ideas and constrained, and it's hard to reach out and think new thoughts if they're controlling the language and the story, because the story is the language. So then how do you take control of the story? you take control of the language. You change the language. It's been done before, and it will be done again. And language does also break free. It's happened before. It will happen again. So, everything isn't hopeless. I mean, it is a freaking mess out there. That's why we're coming at you from the wasteland of modernity. Because it is. It's a wasteland out there, but it's not without hope. And we're aiming at hope, and we want to encourage people to think and to question things in ways that they might not have even thought to question before. And here's the reality of it. So long as language is controlled by people trying to work us in a singular path, I guess. Because even I'm constrained by language. Sorry, folks. But when they're trying to constrain the people, they constrain the language. That constrains thought. 1984. Really. It is a control mechanism. And we're carrying these habits over that we've been taught. We've been taught, the real God has to be the most powerful God. And God is daddy, so therefore my daddy can beat up your daddy. That makes mine the real one. We need to stop playing these games.
Well, and I think another thing, because is it George Orwell that wrote 1984 or Orson Welles? I always mix them up. But George Orwell, he actually pushed the idea of the ordinary people. Because when you come right down to it, even though, the authors and things like that, they typically end up coming from middle class and stuff. The bulk of a people, this is one of the things I usually say about normal people. Most people are hobbits. And I don't use that as an insult. Most people I know actually wouldn't mind being a hobbit. You grow a garden, you do your basic amount of work, and then the rest of the time you kind of just sit around and have a nice life.
People leave you alone.
People leave you alone. You have a nice little house. It's not a mansion, but it's comfortable. You have cheese, you have crackers, you have cakes, you have a little garden, you have some tobacco. You're all good. And this is what most people, from my own personal experience, want. Most people just want a quiet life and to be left alone, like the hobbits. And that's on average the ordinary people. They live their life and they just enjoy it. Or just want to. And that's one thing that struck me about George Orwell, is that he pushed that, because it's something I've brought up before too, is everything comes down to the ordinary people. Not everyone is going to be a Sviatoslav. Not everyone is going to be a Julius Caesar. Not everyone is going to be an Arminius. Not everyone is going to be a Boudica. There's a reason people stand out from history, but it didn't used to be that you had to go that route. It was okay to be ordinary once. It was okay to just be Bob from 3 Doors Down.
Right, and it was okay for ordinary to be extraordinary. It was kind of expected, but it didn't mean that everybody had to be the leader. It didn't mean everybody had to be the great grand hero. Often, if you read these stories, these great grand heroes were supported by the extraordinary ordinary people, or the ordinary people that were extraordinary. However it is that you want to think about it. And we're getting on towards the end of this, so if you made it this far, I'm going to encourage you to check out our podcast. It's under the same name. You can find it in the link tree. It's different subjects than what we put on YouTube, but it's basically the same thing minus all the self-editing that you have to do for YouTube. So, yeah. Let me see. On that note, I'm going to my closing statement is just going to be keep moving and just be brave, and then I'll let the lore keeper finish up any final thoughts that he has.
Well, so I'm going to go ahead and have a couple of points that I want to end on. And the first is, your God doesn't need to be able to beat up my God, and my God doesn't need to be able to beat up your God. The gods are the gods. Who are we to try and rank them, really? If you are a farmer, and I'm not, I practically anything I try to plant dies. I've had more luck with complete randomness than actually trying to grow it. Then a farming or a nature deity might be very, very important to you. But I think one thing I wanted to bring up is the remnants of, and the remainder and the continuation and all those things of our ethnic faith that lasted the longest. The deities did remain in the folklore here and there. You know, Frau Hala has plenty, Freya has some, you know, Hera, Zeus, Veliko, Akerbelts, what have you. But the main things were animism, the spirits, and very, very importantly, the cult of the dead, which is a terrible name. It just meant ancestor veneration. Our family, our kin, both coming and going, they meant a lot to us. And I think that most religions try to focus it around the deities, and I think that's a bit of a mistake. It's not that the deities aren't important, it's that the family and the friends with you in real life, fighting by your side, working by your side, helping you through your troubles, they are more important. And here's the thing is, while I will encourage everyone to become the best version of yourself you can be, for anyone that needs to hear this, you are enough. You yourself, whether you have things you need to work on, whether there's things that you wish you could do, you are enough. Put the effort in, put the strength, be proud, be great. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and sign off and wish all of you a happy Sunday.